Okay, hello, welcome to the channel. My name is Victor, and I'm going to be your anchor for this series. So, in the last 3 months, we've actually gone through the Cisco Ethical Hacker course. This is an intermediate cybersecurity certification for those that have some preliminary knowledge about basic web programming. You could do basic networking, or you're actually taking a course in networking, or you're taking a programming course. Now, that lays some basic foundation for you to understand this particular course. If you don't have that skill set, if you don't have that knowledge, you can check the channel. I will drop the description in the I'll drop the link in the description for you to be able to go through basic programming, networking, and also a basic cybersecurity essentials course. So I will drop those links. And for those that have all of those prerequisites taken care of, so this is the Cisco Ethical Hacker course. It covers quite a lot. You have roughly around 20 to 30 labs that you can go through for the certification program. This is a course offered by Cisco. It has 10 modules, right? So learn the art of offensive security, uncover cybersecurity threats, vulnerabilities before the cyber criminals do. So this covers quite a lot of skill sets in scoping, executing, reporting on vulnerability assessment, and also to try to look at mitigation strategies. Because it's one thing to be able to understand what's happening, then it's another thing to be able to say, okay, this is what you need to do to like prevent that from happening in the future. Now, like I said, you have 10 modules for this program. The first one is ethical hacking and penetration testing. You have planning and scoping. You have information gathering. This is similar to the CompTIA pen test certification program, also similar to the ISA Council CH curriculum. So they all have same kind of content. And if you are looking up to upskill, this is a very nice and important course. So you have something like social engineering attacks, wired and wireless networks, exploiting web applications, right? It combines cloud, mobile, and IoT security into one module. It's also look at what do you do after you've gained access. That's post-exploitation techniques. Then, of course, you have for every penetration testing that you do or any vulnerability assessment that you get to do for a website, a network, a cloud application, or whichever type of IT infrastructure, you always want to report back to the client and tell the client this is what you've done. And there's very, very great importance of communication. Now, of course, the last module is tools and code analysis. Because when you do vulnerability assessment, when you do pen testing, at times what you're going to be checking out is codes, right? Is you're going to be looking at also some tools. Quite a lot of tools to handle, but you could take it simple and stepwise and you'll be fine. So these particular 10 modules in this course on the channel, I have done my time. I've taken my time in the last 3 months to do comprehensive explanation for all of the content. So if you want to go through this content from an expert's perspective, you could go through the playlist. It has an introduction that talks about all the course content. It now goes through explaining each of the module one after the other. So you have the module 1, module 2, module 3, then you have module 4, 5, 6, I think 7, 8. Now, I think you have like 1 or 2 modules I merged. I might need to clarify later, but there's just one module that is left. Within a week, as it runs out, I'm going to complete that particular module. So like 99 or 90% of the course content you have here on the channel. Now, in this next series, we want to be looking at some of the labs. If you look at the course, you have roughly around 34 labs. So we've picked out some very important, roughly around 20 labs. If I need to count, I would say 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, another 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. So roughly around 30 labs. So let's see if we can run through between 15 to 20 in the coming weeks. So one thing you need to understand is that at the end of the course, if you go through this course content, you could get a badge if you pass the exam. It's a very fairly intermediate exam. I think you have up to 1 or 2 attempts. It's a course offered by Cisco NetAcad. It's a free course available. So it's something you want to go through and try to also go through the labs, right? So it's one thing to just go through the content and get the badge. It's another thing to also go through the content, understand the concept, and also go through at least 50% of the labs. That's where you can tell that actually you've gotten the skill set that the course intends to deliver. I wrote this sometime like a year plus, roughly around 1 year, 6 months ago. And this is what the badge looks like. It's a verifiable badge. You could share it on your LinkedIn. You could add it on your profile and all of that. So it proves to who needs to engage with you, or it boosts your CV to say, okay, you have skill set that an ethical hacker will have. So how do you concretize that knowledge base? It's by walking through the labs. So in this series, we're going to start up with the labs. So like I said, you'll have roughly around 30 labs. So you see the labs are very, very detailed. One thing I love about the Cisco platform is that it prides itself in creating labs that are very, very documented. So I'm going to go through the labs just like an introduction. Then we're going to start the labs one after the other. The very first lab here is 1.3.6. So the very first lab is deploy a pre-built Kali Linux virtual machine. So the point is, what's a virtual machine? So a virtual machine is, my voice is actually not so fine. So I think you just bear with me as I go through this lab. So what do you call a virtual machine? So a virtual machine, so you have a box, right? You have an operating system, let's say your host operating system. Then you have what we call a hypervisor. You have a hypervisor. So what's the hypervisor? So a hypervisor is just a software that can help you deploy multiple operating systems or have a multi-tenant system on a host. There are several types. So you have the type 1, you have the type 2, and all of that. But here we're going to be using hypervisors like Oracle VirtualBox, what's it called? VMware. So some of them Oracle VirtualBox. Then you have VMware. So these two softwares can help you virtualize. And when you say virtualize, you want to mimic an environment. So for an ethical hacker, you want to know how to use Linux. Linux operating system is open source. It gives you access to be able to do quite a lot of things that most other closed operating system will not allow you to maybe perform. So once you install, let's say you have a Windows machine, you install a hypervisor like Oracle VirtualBox, right? The next thing is that on your machine, you can now have multiple operating systems. Take, for instance, you can now say, okay, I want to have Linux, I want to have Windows, I want to have Mac, I want to have, let's say, a Microsoft Server operating system, I want to have something like an Android operating system. You can have quite a lot of operating system right in your system without having to do something like a dual boot, without having to get another system. So for somebody that wants to go into cybersecurity, so this is a very nice thing you want to get to do. So in this very particular first lab, we're going to explore how we can set up our computer so that we can perform those labs in a very closed, in a very monitored, in a very secured environment. So it's more like trying to say you want to do sandboxing. And when you say sandboxing, it's just like a playground. Imagine if you need to test some scripts that are vulnerable, you need to test quite a lot of things that are not so clean. You want to do some pen testing, you want to do some vulnerability assessment, you want to work on site applications that are vulnerable. You don't want to do that in a production environment. So in tech, there's what we call development environment, and there's what we call production environment. So the development environment is going to help us like check things, test things, and do all of that. So our production environment is what we will use in our daily, day-to-day activities at work, at home, or in the office. So anytime you're doing anything that's related to cybersecurity, you want to do all of that in the development environment. An example is the sandbox Kali Linux machine. So in this first lab, we're going to learn how to set that up, and I'm going to be doing that in this very first series. The next thing we're going to be walking through is how do we try to investigate a Kali Linux. So after we've deployed our Kali machine, right? So how do we investigate it? For every operating system, you're going to have something like if you're Windows or if you're Mac, you're going to have your Explorer, you're going to have your softwares, you're going to have your folders, just a second. So you're going to have like your folders, you're going to have files, you're going to have permissions. So how do you get to like navigate, create files, add files? How do you get to do all of those kind of things on a new operating system? So if you're not used to the Linux operating system, so while we're trying to investigate this particular machine, we're going to be doing our lab so you can get along with that. Now, if you check all of the labs that are 1.3, 1 point something, they are all related to the modules. They are all related to the modules as seen in module 1. For instance, module 1 is just introduction to ethical hacking and penetration testing. So in that particular module, you're going to be walking through those labs that are 1 point something, right? So in module 2, you have planning and scoping. If you watch this very first series, I explain the entire curriculum in detail. This is just around 21 minutes. So if you want to understand the entirety of the course content, you can go this through first video. You're going to get to understand that. So in module 2, where we talk about planning and scoping, we're going to be looking at this particular lab. We're going to be looking at these labs. So this and this and this. So all the labs that are 2 point something, that's what we're going to be looking at. So the very first 2.1 is compliance. Now, in trying to plan and scope, so I would normally tell my students, I'll tell anybody that wants to get into penetration testing, vulnerability assessment, that pen testing is like a project. So if you're a project manager, or if you have some basic project management skill set, you understand that every project is going to have a start date, is going to have an end date, it is intended to deliver a particular result. And every project needs to be scoped. Now, when you're trying to hack something, you're trying to do vulnerability assessment for something. And by the way, what's vulnerability assessment? I've taken care of that in most of the video explanation series. So what I want to do here is just to give you heads up about all of the labs, and we'll kickstart from the very first lab. So you need to comply to some requirement and local restriction. You don't just get to start hacking something or start doing vulnerability assessment for something without understanding what are the different laws, what are the different guidelines, what are the different policies, what are the different regulations that might control that particular sector, that can control that particular niche, that can control that particular company, or that are actually local to that country. Every country is going to have regulations in terms of if you're trying to test something, if you're trying to hack something, if you're trying to check if something is clean, you must comply to do some of those regulations. So those are the kind of things we're going to be looking at in lab 2.19. In lab 2.210, we're going to be looking at how do you create an agreement. You need license to hack. So you can't just start hacking without getting permission, right? So the word there is permission. So you must have permission to actually hack. You don't just start doing that. The client must give you a permission, a written document telling you a scope and telling you what to test so that subsequently we can now actually patch or secure those things if we see any vulnerability. So in that particular lab, we're going to learn how to do a pen testing agreement. Then you have 2.29, where we talk about scoping. How do you scope your document? Scope just has to do with details of the task you intend to do. Then, of course, in 3, you have finding information from SSL certificates. So at this point, you've now started doing some vulnerability assessment. So that's in module 3. At this point, you've now started doing information gathering and vulnerability assessment. So just a heads up, you're going to find that all of the labs are tied towards the modules. Okay, that's a little bit of introduction. I think that will be all for the lab intro and what's intended for you to do. Now, when we get to start doing this very particular first lab, you will need to make sure that you have the virtual machine. I'm gonna drop the link in the description. The virtual machine, so that when you start, you can fire up and have a Linux machine in your system that you cannot follow through along with the labs. Thank you very much, and I'm going to be seeing you in the very first lab, deploy a pre-built Kali Linux machine. Thank you very much.